In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pushed deeper into the shattered heart of Nazi Germany, Captain Daniel Rothstein of the United States Third Army stood at the gates of hell and fell in love. The place was called Dachau, a name that would become synonymous with humanity's darkest hour. And the woman was little more than a shadow, weighing 70 pounds, her dark eyes enormous in a face that looked ancient despite belonging to someone barely 20 years old. Her name was Sarah Levin, and she had survived what was designed to be unsurvivable. When their eyes met across the liberation chaos of April 29, 1945, neither could have known that this moment would spark a love story that would challenge everything they believed about duty, identity, and the possibility of hope after unimaginable horror. But falling in love in the ruins of genocide is one thing. Building a life from that love would prove infinitely more complicated. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more untold wartime love stories that history tried to forget. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. Captain Daniel Rothstein had been with the 45th Infantry Division since the invasion of Sicily in 1943. He'd seen combat in Italy, in France after D-Day, and through the brutal winter push into Germany. He was 27 years old, the son of German Jewish immigrants who'd fled Berlin in 1935 when they saw which way the wind was blowing. His father had been a professor of literature, his mother a concert pianist. They'd left behind everything, their home, their careers, most of their family, to build a new life in Brooklyn. Daniel had joined the army in 1942, driven by a burning need to fight the regime that had driven his family into exile. He spoke fluent German, which made him valuable to intelligence operations. He'd interrogated prisoners, translated documents, and witnessed the systematic destruction of the country his parents had once called home. But nothing in 2 years of war had prepared him for Dachau. The 45th Infantry Division reached the camp on the morning of April 29, 1945. The smell hit them first, a sickening combination of death and human waste and something else, something indescribable that would cling to their uniforms and their memories forever. Then came the sounds, the moans of the dying, the wails of the survivors, the terrible silence that hung over the mountains of emaciated corpses stacked like firewood. Daniel walked through the gates with his rifle clutched in shaking hands, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. Skeletal figures in striped uniforms stumbled toward the American soldiers, some weeping, some laughing with a kind of hysterical relief, some simply staring with eyes that had seen too much to ever truly see anything again. He'd been briefed about the camps. They all had, but knowing intellectually that such places existed, and standing in the middle of one were two entirely different things. Daniel found himself in one of the women's barracks, helping medics assess who could be saved and who was too far gone. The women lay in bunks stacked 3 high, sometimes 2 or 3 to a bunk meant for one. Their bodies mere collections of bones held together by thin skin. Many were already dead. Many more would die in the coming days despite the best efforts of the Allied medical teams. That's where he saw her. She was in a middle bunk, her eyes open and alert, despite the devastating state of her body. Unlike many of the others, she wasn't calling out or reaching for the soldiers. She simply watched, and there was something in that gaze, an intelligence, a strength, a refusal to be broken even now, that stopped Daniel cold. "Sprechen Sie English?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her bunk. "Do you speak English?" "A little," she whispered in heavily accented English. "My father, he taught me. Before. That single word contained universes of loss. What's your name?" Sarah Levin." Her voice was barely audible. "From Warsaw. I'm Daniel. Captain Daniel Rothstein, United States Army. You're safe now. We're going to get you medical care. Get you food. Not too much food," she interrupted, and there was dark humor in her voice. "Too much food now, I die. We know this. Slowly. Small amounts. Slowly." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Even in liberation, starvation dictated the terms. "I'll make sure the medics know." "You are Jewish," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Rothstein, German Jew. My parents were from Berlin. They left in 35. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Pain, envy, grief. "They were lucky." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "They were." Over the next week, as the camp was transformed into an emergency medical facility and survivors were slowly stabilized, Daniel found himself returning to Sarah's bedside whenever his duties allowed. He told himself it was his responsibility as an officer who spoke German, as someone who could serve as a bridge between the survivors and the American medical staff. He told himself he was just checking on all the survivors equally. He was lying to himself. The truth was that Sarah had awakened something in him, a desperate need to prove that beauty could still exist after horror, that love could still bloom in poisoned soil. What neither of them fully understood yet was that their relationship existed in a complicated gray area of military regulations and social expectations. Fraternization between American soldiers and displaced persons wasn't explicitly forbidden, but it was heavily discouraged. The camps were meant to be temporary waypoints, and the displaced persons were technically under American military jurisdiction, creating an inherent power imbalance. More than that, though, was the unspoken concern about what such relationships meant. Were these soldiers taking advantage of vulnerable women? Were the survivors seeking security and protection by attaching themselves to American officers? Could any relationship that began in such circumstances be genuine? Daniel's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, called him into his office in June. "I'm hearing things about you and one of the survivors," Patterson said without preamble. "A girl named Sarah Levin." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I can assure you that my conduct has been entirely proper." "I didn't say it wasn't," Patterson interrupted. "I asked you what's going on." Daniel took a breath. "I've developed feelings for her, sir. I've been visiting her in the DP camp, bringing her supplies, helping her adjust. Are you sleeping with her?" "No, sir." Daniel felt his face flush. "I would never. She's still recovering. She's vulnerable." "Good. Because if you were, I'd have to relieve you of duty immediately." Patterson leaned back in his chair. "Look, Rothstein, I'm not heartless. I understand that bonds form in situations like these, but you need to understand the position you're putting yourself in. And her. If this gets out, people will assume the worst. They'll say she's using you for protection or special treatment. They'll say you're taking advantage of a desperate woman. Fair or not, that's how it'll be seen. With respect, sir, I don't care how it's seen. I care about her. I'm in love with her." Patterson sighed. "You planning to marry her?" The question hung in the air. Daniel hadn't let himself think that far ahead, but the moment Patterson asked, he knew the answer. "Yes, sir, if she'll have me." "Then you'd better do it properly. No sneaking around. No gray areas. You want to be with this girl, you marry her legally, you go through official channels, and you make damn sure no one can accuse either of you of impropriety. Understood?" "Yes, sir. And Rothstein, you'd better be damn sure about this, because once you marry a DP, your military career is essentially over. The Army's not going to promote an officer married to a concentration camp survivor. Fair or not, that's the reality." Daniel met his commanding officer's eyes. "I'm sure, sir." Patterson shook his head. "Then God help you both." Daniel proposed to Sarah. On a warm evening in July 1945, they were walking through the gardens that some of the DP camp residents had started cultivating. Small plots of vegetables and flowers, attempts to make beauty grow in a place that had known so much ugliness. "Sarah," he said, stopping beside a row of tomato plants, "I need to ask you something." She turned to him, curious. She'd gained more weight, nearly 110 pounds now, and there was color in her cheeks, and light in her eyes that hadn't been there 2 months ago. She was, Daniel thought, the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "I know this is fast," he continued. "I know you're still healing. I know you might not be ready. But I also know that I love you, and I want to spend my life with you, and I don't want to wait until the world decides we're appropriate before I tell you that." He pulled a small ring from his pocket. Nothing fancy, just a simple silver band he'd commissioned from a jeweler in Munich. "Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, her expression unreadable. "You know what people will say. I don't care what people say. You should care. They'll say I'm using you. They'll say I'm damaged goods. They'll say you're making a mistake. Sarah, they'll say I'm marrying you for an American passport, for protection, for food. They'll say I'm incapable of real love after what happened to me. They'll say, what do you say?" Daniel interrupted gently. "Forget everyone else. What do you want?" Sarah looked up at him, and her eyes were wet with tears. "I want to say yes. I want to believe that I deserve happiness after everything. I want to believe that love is still possible, that I can build a life, that I can be something other than a survivor. But I'm scared, Daniel. I'm so scared that I'm broken beyond repair. What if I can't be a good wife? What if the nightmares never stop? What if—" Daniel pulled her into his arms, feeling her small frame against his chest, feeling her heart hammering. "Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to be willing to try, to build something new, to choose life over death, hope over despair, love over fear. And I'll be right there beside you, every step of the way." Sarah pulled back enough to look up at him. "Why me, Daniel? Out of everyone you could have, why a broken Jewish girl from a death camp?" "Because you're not broken," Daniel said fiercely. "Because you survived what was meant to destroy you, and you're still here, still fighting, still hoping. Because when I look at you, I see the strongest person I've ever met. Because you're beautiful and brave and brilliant, and I don't want anyone else. I want you, only you, always you." Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Ask me again." Daniel took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. "Sarah Levin, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the DP camp chapel. The camp rabbi, himself a survivor, performed the service in Hebrew and English. Sarah wore a simple white dress that one of the other women had made from parachute silk. Daniel wore his dress uniform. There were no flowers, no fancy cake, no orchestra. There were just two people who had found each other in the ruins of genocide, promising to build a life together against all odds. The camp residents attended en masse, filling the small chapel to overflowing. Many of them wept through the entire ceremony. For them, this wedding was more than just two people getting married. It was proof that life continued, that love was still possible, that the Nazis hadn't won after all. When the rabbi pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in cheers and applause. Daniel kissed his bride, and Sarah kissed him back, and for a moment, the weight of the past lifted just enough to let in a sliver of light. But marriage, as it turned out, was only the beginning of their challenges. The United States Army had no clear protocol for soldiers who married displaced persons. Daniel's discharge was expedited. He was out of uniform by September 1945, just 4 months after the war ended. Without his military status, he lost access to housing, rations, and transportation. He and Sarah were moved out of the officers' quarters and into the general DP camp population. Immigration to the United States was another nightmare. Sarah breathed. "Just breathe! You don't understand." She was crying now, great heaving sobs. "My mother was pregnant when they took her. 5 months pregnant. They gassed her, Daniel. They gassed her and my brothers and my unborn sibling all at once. How can I bring a baby into a world that did that? How can I—" "This isn't that world anymore," Daniel said, pulling her close. The war's over. The camps are closed. We're building something new. Our baby will be born into freedom, Sarah, into hope, into a family that loves them. But what if I can't love it? Sarah whispered, voicing her deepest fear. What if I look at the baby and all I see is everything I lost? What if I'm too broken to be a mother? Then we'll figure it out together, Daniel said, the same words he'd spoken when he proposed. You're not alone in this, Sarah. You've never been alone since I found you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And we're going to raise this baby together. And we're going to teach them about your family, about your father and mother and brothers, so they know where they came from, so the Nazis don't get to erase your family from history. Sarah cried in his arms for a long time, but eventually the panic subsided, replaced by something quieter and more tentative. Hope. Their daughter was born in July 1946, in a hospital in Munich, run by the American occupation forces. Sarah endured 20 hours of labor, her body still weakened from years of starvation. Daniel was barred from the delivery room. Men weren't allowed, but he paced the hallway outside, praying in Hebrew and English and any language he could think of, begging God to let both of them survive. When the nurse finally emerged with a tiny bundle wrapped in white cloth, Daniel felt his heart stop. "Congratulations, Captain," the nurse said with a smile. "You have a healthy baby girl, and my wife? Exhausted but doing well. You can see her in a few minutes." Daniel held his daughter for the first time and felt the world shift beneath his feet. She was so small, so fragile, with a crown of dark hair and her mother's eyes. She gazed up at him with the unfocused stare of a newborn, and Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. I'm your papa. I promise I'm going to keep you safe. I promise you're going to grow up in a world better than the one your mama survived. I promise you'll know who your grandparents were, and your uncles, and all the family that came before. You're named for them. You carry their memory forward. And you're loved. Oh, sweetheart, you're so loved." Sarah was pale and exhausted when he entered her room, but when she saw the baby, something in her face softened. Daniel placed their daughter in her arms and watched as Sarah looked down at the tiny face. "She's beautiful," Sarah breathed, "just like her mother. What should we name her?" Daniel had been thinking about this for months. "I was thinking Miriam, after your mother, and Rose, after mine." Miriam Rose Rothstein, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect." She looked down at baby Miriam, and Daniel saw something he hadn't seen in his wife's face since liberation. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "Hello, Miriam," Sarah whispered. "I'm your mama, and I'm going to do my best by you, I promise. I'm going to teach you to be strong and brave and kind. I'm going to tell you about your grandmother and your uncles and the world they lived in. I'm going to make sure you know where you came from. And I'm going to love you with everything I have left." Baby Miriam made a small sound. Not quite a cry, more of a murmur. And Sarah laughed through her tears. It was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. Their immigration papers finally came through in March 1947, nearly 18 months after they'd applied. They boarded a military transport ship in Hamburg with 2 suitcases, $300 in savings, and a 9-month-old baby. The journey across the Atlantic took 8 days. Sarah stood at the railing for hours, watching the gray waves roll past, holding Miriam against her chest. She was leaving Europe behind, the continent where she'd been born, where her family had lived for generations, where everyone she'd loved had died. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, coming up beside her. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about my father. He used to talk about America. He called it the Golden Land, the place where anyone could start over. He wanted to take us there, but he never could afford the passage." She looked down at Miriam, who was sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. He would have loved to see this, to know that his daughter made it, that his granddaughter will grow up free. He knows, Daniel said quietly. Wherever he is, he knows. And he's proud of you. They arrived in New York Harbor on a cold morning in late March. Daniel stood at the ship's railing with his arm around Sarah, both of them watching as the Statue of Liberty emerged from the early morning mist. Sarah was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "I made it," she whispered. "I survived. I'm here. You're home," Daniel corrected gently. "We're home." They moved to Brooklyn, into a small apartment in a Jewish neighborhood filled with other refugees and survivors. Daniel used his GI Bill benefits to enroll in college, studying to become a teacher. Sarah stayed home with Miriam, learning to navigate American life, the strange food, the overwhelming abundance, the peculiar customs. It wasn't easy. Sarah still had nightmares. She still hoarded food. She still panicked in crowded spaces. But slowly, incrementally, she began to heal. She made friends with other survivor wives. She joined a synagogue. She learned to find joy in small things. Miriam's first steps, the smell of bread baking, snow falling on Brooklyn streets. Daniel graduated in 1951 and got a job teaching history at a public high school. They moved to a larger apartment. They had 2 more children, a son named Joseph after Sarah's father, and another daughter named Rachel. Sarah began working part-time at a Jewish community center, teaching English to new immigrants, helping others navigate the same journey she'd once made. They built a life. It wasn't the life Daniel's parents had envisioned for their son. He'd never be a rich man or a famous man. And it wasn't the life Sarah had dreamed of in Warsaw before the war came. But it was their life, built on love and survival, and the stubborn refusal to let the Nazis have the final word. In the spring of 1985, 40 years after liberation, Daniel and Sarah returned to Europe together for the first time since emigrating. They were 67 and 62 years old, respectively, their hair gray, their bodies marked by time. Their 3 children were grown with families of their own. They'd become grandparents 7 times over. They visited Dachau first. The camp had been turned into a memorial, preserved as a reminder of what had happened there. That barracks and seeing you, and realizing that hope was still possible even in the darkest place in the world. "Do you think we would have met if there had been no war?" Sarah asked. "If my family had stayed in Warsaw and yours in Berlin? If the world had stayed normal?" Daniel considered the question. Maybe not. But then again, maybe we were always meant to find each other. Maybe in every version of history, in every possible world, I would have found you somehow. Because some things are just meant to be. Sarah smiled. That same smile that had captured Daniel's heart 40 years ago. Weathered now, but still beautiful. Still full of light. I like that idea. That even the Nazis couldn't stop us from finding each other. They tried to destroy everything good in the world, Daniel said. But love was stronger. We were stronger. And here we are, 40 years later, grandparents in Brooklyn, still holding hands, still choosing each other every single day. I'd say we won. Yes, Sarah agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. We won. They returned to New York a week later, back to their apartment in Brooklyn, back to their children and grandchildren and the life they'd built together from ashes and hope and love that refused to die. Daniel taught history until he was 73, finally retiring in 1991. He spent his retirement years giving talks at schools and community centers about the Holocaust, about liberation, about the importance of remembering. Sarah continued her work with new immigrants until her health began to fail in the mid-1990s. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in July 1995, surrounded by their 3 children, 13 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. It was a joyous celebration, a testament to the family they'd built, the love that had sustained them, the victory of life over death. Sarah died in December 1998, at the age of 75, of heart failure. She died peacefully in her sleep, with Daniel holding her hand, just as he had on their wedding night 53 years earlier. Daniel lived 4 more years, sustained by his children and grandchildren, but never quite whole without Sarah. He died in his sleep in September 2002, at the age of 84. At his funeral, his eldest daughter, Miriam, now a grandmother herself, spoke about her parents' love story. She spoke about how they'd found each other in hell and built heaven together. She spoke about how their love had created a family that now numbered 47 people across 4 generations. She spoke about how the Nazis had tried to erase the Jewish people from history, and had instead created a love story that proved love was stronger than hate, life was stronger than death, and hope was stronger than despair. "My parents' love saved the world," Miriam said, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe not the whole world, but it saved their world. It saved them, and it saved me, and it saved all of us. And that's the most powerful thing I know, that even in the darkest moment of human history, 2 people found each other and chose love. And that love rippled outward, creating all of us, creating a future that Hitler tried to destroy but couldn't. We are the victory. We are the resistance. We are the proof that love wins." Daniel and Sarah were buried side by side in a Jewish cemetery in Queens. Their headstone reads simply, Daniel Rothstein, 1918-2002, Sarah Levin Rothstein, 1923 to 1998, beloved husband and wife, who found love in the darkness and brought light into the world. The forbidden love between an American officer and a Jewish girl from a death camp wasn't forbidden because it was wrong. It was forbidden because the world couldn't quite believe that something so beautiful could emerge from something so terrible. But Daniel and Sarah proved that love doesn't wait for permission, doesn't ask for ideal circumstances, doesn't concern itself with what's convenient or comfortable or socially acceptable. Love simply is. And sometimes, in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people, at the most unlikely times, love blooms in the ruins and refuses to die. Their story is a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hour, light can find a way through. That survival is not just about staying alive, but about choosing to live. That healing is possible, even from wounds that seem too deep to ever close. And that love, real, honest, committed love, can transform tragedy into triumph, despair into hope, and death into life. But theirs wasn't the only love story born from the ashes of the Holocaust. In our next story, you'll meet a German nurse who risked execution to hide a wounded Jewish resistance fighter in her home for 18 months, and the impossible choice she faced when the war finally ended. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.